This information is presented by Bluewater Auto Restoration.
Welcome back. This is week 6 of the 2026 Bluewater Auto Restoration podcast.
We release new podcasts every Saturday morning.
And it is genuinely good to be back in the studio.
It is. And today we are doing exactly what we love to do. We've got a huge stack of material in front of us. I'm looking at these visual timelines, spec sheets, a bunch of builder notes that look like they've seen some grease.
Yeah, some of these have definitely lived on a shop bench.
And we are going to sift through all of it and pull out the most important insights for you.
The mission is always the same, right? We take all this raw data, all these numbers and dates, and we try to find the story, the why behind it all.
Exactly. And the subject today is, it's a big one. It's a topic I think a lot of people feel they know, but the details tell a different story. We are talking American horsepower muscle car engine history.
Oh, it's a massive topic. You could do a whole series on just one of these engines. It's really the soul of American car culture.
It is.
Yeah.
And to guide us, we've got this amazing visual. It's a timeline that lays out 12 specific engines starting in 1965 and taking us all the way up to 2023. And my first reaction, just looking at the list, was, okay, cool, a bunch of big, loud V8s.
That's the standard take, isn't it? Just noise and horsepower figures.
Right. But you're telling me there's a much deeper narrative here.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just a greatest hits list. If you look at the progression, it's a story of philosophy. It's a story of how engineers solved problems.
The story struggle, you said earlier.
Yeah, a struggle against physics, trying to make heavy iron blocks breathe, a struggle against government regulations, and a struggle against the economy and gas prices. We're going to track this evolution from what I call brute force.
Where the answer to everything is just more cubic inches.
Exactly. Bigger is better. We'll see that, then we'll see the crash. The dark ages of emissions where performance almost died.
The malaise era. We don't like to talk about it.
The dark times, for sure. But then you see this incredible rebirth, the rise of smart engineering, computers and turbos, and it all leads to this modern golden age that we're in now.
So that's our mission. We're going to break this down into 4 distinct eras. We've got the big displacement era, then the peak and collapse, the tech transition, and finally, the modern era.
We're popping the hood on each one, looking at the nuts and bolts.
And before we fire up that first engine, just a quick reminder for everyone listening, go check out the BluewaterAutoRestoration.com website. Seriously, the work they're doing there is the real-world application of everything we're about to discuss.
Absolutely. And remember, you can find our deep dives on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud. So wherever you are, you won't miss a thing.
Okay, let's do it. Let's go back in time. Segment 1, the 1960s, the era of brute force and displacement.
Right, so paint the picture for us. What's the world like in, say, 1965?
Well, gas is, 30 cents a gallon? Maybe less?
Yeah, something like that. And it's full of lead, which engines loved.
Full of lead, and the tires are, they're basically black, round suggestions of grip.
Terrible. Bias ply tires. Hard as a rock, skinny as a bicycle tire, zero traction.
So the whole engineering philosophy at the time seems to be built around torque. Just massive, instant torque. And the tools are simple. Cast iron blocks, cast iron heads, carburetors.
And that one core belief. There's no replacement for displacement. Airflow in cubic inches. That was the formula. There were no computers, no traction control. If you wanted to be faster than the other guy, you either made the engine bigger or you made it breathe better.
And usually you did both.
Usually did both, yeah.
So let's start with the first engine on our timeline. 1965, the Chevy 396 Big Block. And it's labeled here as the Mark IV.
A truly pivotal engine for Chevrolet. This changed everything for them.
So I have to ask the obvious question. If this is the Mark IV, what happened to Marks 1, 2, and 3?
That's a great question. They weren't failures, but they were steps on a ladder. I was what they called the W Series engine, the 348, the 409.
The She's Real Fine, My 409 engine, the Beach Boys song.
That's the one. But the 409 had a design flaw. The combustion chamber was in the top of the cylinder bore, not the cylinder head. It just couldn't breathe at high RPM. So Chevy developed the Mark II in secret. It was a race engine they called the Mystery Motor.
The Mystery Motor. Sounds dramatic.
It was. They showed up with it at Daytona in '63 and just blew everyone away. So the Mark IV, or 396, is the production version of that race engine. And this is key. It wasn't just a bored and stroked small block. It was a totally new design.
Designed for what, exactly? What was the goal?
Power, obviously, but also packaging.
Packaging, you mean fitting it in the car?
Exactly. The engine bay in a 65 Corvette or a Chevelle isn't a ballroom. You have to physically fit this giant engine in there on a moving assembly line. So they came up with this brilliant cylinder head design they called the porcupine head.
Porcupine. Why like that?
Because of the valves. In most engines, the valves are lined up in a neat little row. In the Mark IV, the valves are canted. They're splayed out at different angles, sticking out all over the place like the quills on a porcupine.
And that helps airflow.
Massively. It lets the air make a much smoother turn into the cylinder. Better breathing equals more power.
Okay, let's look at the specs. 396 cubic inches. That's about 6.5 liters.
Which is huge today, but back then that was Chevy's entry-level big block.
And the horsepower is listed around 425. But I see this note here, and it's important. SAE gross. Can you explain what that means? Because that's not what we see today, is it?
No, it is radically different. SAE gross horsepower was let's call it an optimistic measurement. They'd take the engine out of the car, bolt it to a stand in a laboratory.
Okay.
Then they'd take off all the accessories. The water pump, the alternator, the power steering pump, the air filter, all gone. They'd bolt on big open headers with no exhaust system.
So it's the engine on its absolute best day with no responsibilities.
Precisely. It's a fantasy number. In the real world, bolted into a car with a full exhaust and all the belts turning, that 425 horsepower was probably closer to 350. But still, in 1965, that was an incredible amount of power.
It really set the tone for that mid-60s muscle car feel. But I'm looking at these builder notes, and there's one phrase that keeps popping up. Heat management.
Ah, yes. The reality of the big block. You are stuffing a 700-pound chunk of cast iron that generates immense heat into a very tight space.
Especially in something like a Corvette with a fiberglass body.
It's a pressure cooker. Cast iron just soaks up heat and holds on to it. There was very little room for air to circulate. Restorers today spend a fortune on modern aluminum radiators and electric fans trying to solve the same problem those guys had in '65.
So it was a monster, but a hot-running, stressful monster.
It demanded your full attention, let's put it that way. You were always watching that temperature gauge.
Okay, so speaking of high-maintenance monsters, let's shift gears. Over to the Ford camp, 1967. The 427 side oiler.
Now this is a whole different animal.
How so? It's another giant V8, right?
It is, but the philosophy is completely different. The Chevy 396 was a street engine you could take racing. The 427 side oiler was a pure, thoroughbred race engine that Ford was forced to put in a few street cars.
Why were they forced to?
Homologation rules. To race it at Le Mans and in NASCAR, they had to prove it was a production engine. This engine's only reason for being was to win races, specifically to beat Ferrari.
The whole Ford v Ferrari legend.
That's it. And that name, side oiler, it's not marketing fluff. It's a very literal description of a hugely important and very expensive engineering decision.
All right, break that down. We know engines need oil. Why does it matter what side it comes from?
Okay, so in a standard V8, your oil pump sits at the bottom. It pushes oil up to the top of the engine first to lubricate the camshaft and the lifters, and then the oil trickles back down to the crankshaft and the main bearings at the very bottom.
Seems logical enough. Top down.
It's fine for your daily driver. But imagine you're at Le Mans in 1967. You're screaming down the Mulsanne Straight at 7,000 RPM for minutes at a time. The forces inside that engine are insane. By the time the oil gets down to those main bearings, the ones holding the crank in place, the pressure can drop.
And if you lose oil pressure at the crankshaft?
Boom! Catastrophic failure. You spin a bearing, a rod lets go, and your race is over.
So what did the side oiler do differently?
It rewrote the rules. Ford cast a special oil gallery, basically a long tube, down the side of the engine block. This gallery took high-pressure oil directly from the pump and shot it straight into the main bearings first.
It fed the most critical component before anything else got a drop.
Priority main oiling. It was a guarantee that no matter how hard you punish that engine, the crankshaft would be safe.
And the specs on this thing, I'm seeing race-tuned versions from Le Mans were reporting around 485 horsepower at 6,400 RPM.
And 6,400 RPM in a 7-liter iron engine back end was absolutely screaming. That is a lot of heavy metal moving very, very fast.
So my analogy was, the Chevy 396 is for winning the stoplight drag race, but this Ford 427 is built to survive a 24-hour battle.
It's the endurance champion. It's practically bulletproof, but that priority oiling system made it incredibly expensive and complex to build.
Which brings us to the final boss of the 1960s. The undisputed heavyweight, 1969. The Dodge 426 Street AEMI.
The legend. They called it the elephant.
The cultural icon. Even today, you say the word Hemi, and people who don't even like cars, they know what you're talking about. It's a brand in itself.
It is. It's pure marketing genius that has lasted for 50 years. But we need to separate the legend from the actual engineering.
Okay, let's talk about the metal. Hemi comes from the shape of the combustion chamber, right? Kind of spherical.
Exactly. Imagine you take an orange and slice it perfectly in half. That dome shape, that's the top of the cylinder.
And why is that shape special?
Yeah.
Most engines at the time were wedge-shaped.
A wedge is efficient, but it's also crowded. The valves have to sit side by side. The Hemi's giant open dome meant Chrysler engineers could put the intake valve on one side of the dome and the exhaust valve on the complete opposite side.
A straight path for the air to flow across.
A massive, unobstructed cross-flow path. The air and fuel have a straight shot in, and the exhaust has a straight shot out. It can breathe better than almost any other engine design.
That sounds perfect. Why doesn't every engine use that design today?
Because, and this is the great irony of the Hemi, it's actually a pretty terrible design for a normal street car.
Wait, what? You can't say that. You're destroying the myth.
Here's the builder's reality. That big open dome is really inefficient at burning fuel. The spark plug is way over on one side, and the flame has to travel a long, long way to burn all the fuel mixture.
So it's not a clean burn.
Not at all. It runs dirty, it wastes a lot of heat, and the ports leading to those enormous valves are the size of sewer pipes. Now think about what happens at low speed when you're just idling at a stoplight. The air moving through those giant ports is moving very slowly. It's lazy. It doesn't mix with the fuel properly. So the engine runs rough. It loads up. It bogs down. It fouls spark plugs.
It's a diva. It doesn't want to go to the grocery store.
It is the ultimate diva, and these builder notes confirm it, requires precise tuning. It had two massive 4-barrel carburetors. If they weren't perfectly synchronized, if your ignition timing was off by even a degree, the Hemi would run like an absolute pig.
When you finally get it out on an open road and you stand on the gas pedal.
When you open those 8 barrels up and the RPMs climb past 3,000, and that massive airflow finally starts to work, it is an almost religious experience.
Religious experience. I like that.
The sound, the feeling, it just pulls and pulls and never stops. The factory officially rated it at 425 horsepower.
And we know what that means.
It means it was a lie. A complete fabrication to keep the insurance companies from fainting. Independent dyno tests on bone stock street Hemis from back in the day consistently showed numbers closer to 494 horsepower.
Almost 500 horsepower in a street car in 1969.
It's just staggering. It wasn't efficient, it wasn't practical, the engine itself weighed almost 800 pounds, but when it came to making sheer, terrifying power, it was the king.
So that's the 60s in a nutshell. Brute force, race-bred durability, and massive inefficient airflow. A decade of glorious excess.
The best kind of excess.
But now we turn the page. The party's about to reach its peak right before the lights come on. This is segment 2, the early 1970s, the peak, the crash, and the last stand.
This is such a dramatic couple of years. We're standing right on the peak, looking down at the cliff edge.
And we start at the very top of that peak, 1970, the Chevy 454 LS6.
The pinnacle, the absolute high watermark of the factory big block.
If the Hemi was the exotic, finicky race engine, what was the LS6?
The LS6 was the factory-built sledgehammer. It was Chevy's answer to the Hemi.
Sledgehammer. That feels right.
It wasn't as technically exotic as the Hemi. It was just the ultimate evolution of their Mark IV big block, bored and stroked out to a massive 454 cubic inches. That's 7.4 liters.
And the power figures.
Factory rated at 450 horsepower. But the number that really tells the story is the torque. 500 pound-feet of it.
500. Can you put that number in perspective for someone driving, say, a modern car?
Sure. A brand new 4-cylinder Toyota Camry makes, 180 pound-feet of torque. A high-end Porsche 911 makes around 400. The Chevelle in 1970 was making 500, and it made it at a low RPM.
So you barely touch the gas and the car just lunges.
It feels like you've been hit from behind by a locomotive. It's just brutal, instant acceleration, and a big part of its personality came from its solid lifter camshaft.
I see that term here, solid lifters. What did that actually mean to the person behind the wheel?
Okay, so a lifter is the part that rides on the camshaft lobe and pushes the valve open. Most cars, then and now, use hydraulic lifters. They have a little oil-filled plunger inside that acts as a cushion. They're quiet, they're smooth, they're zero maintenance.
And solid lifters
are exactly what they sound like. A solid piece of hardened steel, metal on metal, no cushion.
Why on earth would you want that? It sounds harsh.
Because it's precise. At very high RPM, a hydraulic lifter can get overwhelmed. It can pump up or float and lose contact with the cam. A solid lifter is a direct connection. It does exactly what the camshaft tells it to every single time. But the trade-off is noise and maintenance.
What kind of noise?
A very distinctive mechanical clatter. It sounds like a high-performance sewing machine. Tick, 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 tick. And you had to manually adjust them. Every few thousand miles, you'd have to take the valve covers off with a wrench and a feeler gauge and set the clearance for every single valve. It was a ritual.
So the LS6 was the peak. Loud, brutal, high maintenance, and incredibly powerful. But that was 1970. Then the calendar flips to 1971,
Yeah.
and the whole world changes.
The party's over, the Clean Air Act arrives, insurance companies are freaking out, and the mandate comes down for unleaded fuel.
And that brings us to the next engine,
Uh-huh.
the 1971 Pontiac 455 HO.
This is such a fascinating engine because it's the first example of engineers having to fight back against the rules. They had one hand tied behind their back.
And the main enemy was the loss of high-octane leaded gasoline, right? Which meant they had to lower the compression ratio.
No, it was the killer. High compression is key to making power and efficiency. The LS6 was running, over 11-to-1 compression? For 1971, GM mandated that all engines had to run on new, low-octane, unleaded fuel.
So the Pontiac's compression had to drop.
It plummeted all the way down to about 8.4-to-1. That's a catastrophic drop in power potential. On paper, this engine should have been a complete dog.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't, because the Pontiac engineers were just incredibly clever. They were stubborn. They said, okay, if we can't squeeze the air-fuel mixtures hard, let's just make it incredibly easy for the engine to breathe. They focused all their attention on airflow.
So they designed new cylinder heads, a new intake manifold.
Exactly. They compensated for the low compression with incredibly high flow. The final numbers were 335 horsepower. And this is during the confusing gross-to-net rating transition. But look at the torque. 480 pound-feet.
Wow. It barely lost any torque compared to the monsters from the year before.
And that's the whole point of this engine. The 455 HO wasn't a high RPM screamer like the LS6. It was a low-revving torque monster. It was designed to get a big, heavy Pontiac Trans Am moving with authority. It was all about drivability.
So why is this engine so important in our timeline?
Because it represents the last stand.
Okay.
It was a performance division using smarts, not just brute force, to keep the soul of the muscle car alive for one more year, even as the rules were closing in.
And then they closed in for good. We get to 1973. And the Ford 351 Cleveland.
The tragic hero of the Malaise era.
It's known as the big head, small block.
That's right. The Cleveland is a small block V8, so it's physically much smaller and lighter than the big 427s. But its cylinder heads were enormous. They were basically race car heads put on a street engine.
But by 73, the world is a different place.
It's a bleak landscape for performance. We are deep in the smog era now. You have EGR valves pumping inert exhaust gas back into the intake. You have incredibly lean carburetor settings. You have ignition timing that's retarded to the point of being useless.
All of which kills power, right?
It strangles it. The 73 351 Cleveland was rated somewhere in the mid-200 horsepower range, a shadow of its former self.
So why is it on this list of legends? That sounds pretty depressing.
It's on the list because the legend of the Cleveland isn't about how it ran in 1973. It's about the potential that was buried under all that smog equipment.
The bones of the engine were still good.
The bones were magnificent. Those 4V cylinder heads, the ones with the big ports, they flowed enough air to support 500 or 600 horsepower. Engine builders today hunt for these things in junkyards.
So the dream is to find a smog-era Cleveland, strip off all the 70s junk, put some real pistons in it, and unleash the beast within.
That's the dream. But there's a warning in these builder notes I want to touch on. It's about matching the 4V versus the 2V heads to your car.
Okay, what's the difference?
It goes back to our Hemi conversation about port size. The 4V heads had massive ports designed for high RPM racing. The 2V heads had much smaller ports. And for a heavy street car with an automatic transmission, those huge 4V ports were actually too big.
How can a port be too big? Is it more airflow always better?
Not at low speed. The air moves too slowly in a giant port, so the fuel doesn't atomize well. The car feels lazy, boggy, unresponsive. The smaller 2V port keeps the air velocity high, giving you crisp throttle response right where you need it on the street. It's a classic case of bigger not always being better.
So the 70s end not with a bang, but with a wheeze. The muscle car is effectively dead.
It was in a coma for about a decade.
But then, something completely unexpected happens. Let's move to segment 3. The late 1980s and 1990s. And suddenly, technology replaces cubes.
The resurrection. And it came from the most unlikely place.
1987, the Buick 3.8 Turbo, the Grand National, and specifically the GNX.
The ultimate outlier. The car that broke every rule.
First of all, it's a V6 in a world where American muscle meant V8, period. And it's a Buick. This was the brand our grandparents drove.
Exactly. It was based on the Regal, which was a soft, floaty, two-door coupe. But a small team of rogue engineers at Buick decided to add a turbocharger, an intercooler, and electronic fuel injection to their humble 3.8-liter V6.
Let's talk about that tech stack, because it's a preview of the future.
Yeah.
Turbocharging, intercooling, and calibration.
That word calibration is the absolute game changer. For the first time, we have a sophisticated computer and engine control unit making all the decisions.
So no more turning screws on a carburetor.
Nope. You have sensors measuring airflow, engine temperature, and detonation. And the computer adjusts the fuel and spark timing hundreds of times a second. It's a digital brain.
And the intercooler. Explain the physics of that. Why is cooling the air so important?
It's basic physics. When you use a turbo to compress air, you also heat it up a lot. Hot air is less dense. The oxygen molecules are spread far apart.
So you get less oxygen into the cylinder for the explosion.
Right. An intercooler is just a radiator for the air. It passes the hot compressed air through a core, cools it down, which makes it dense again. You pack more oxygen into the cylinder, you can add more fuel, and you make a bigger bang.
The official specs from Buick were 276 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque.
Those numbers are a complete joke, an absolute fabrication.
Low.
Laughably low. The GNX was faster than the V8 Corvette in 1987. It was running 0-60 in the mid-4-second range. In reality, it was making well over 300 horsepower, maybe closer to 350.
The aha moment here is that Buick accidentally stumbled upon the formula for modern performance.
Think about it. Look at a performance car today. It's probably a smaller displacement engine with a turbo, direct injection, and a very smart computer. Buick did that 40 years ago. They were ahead of their time.
And then, after 1 year of the GNX, GM killed the whole program.
They had to. It was a political nightmare. You couldn't have your flagship sports car, the Corvette, getting beaten in a drag race by a blacked-out Buick sedan. It was just too embarrassing.
The ultimate Darth Vader car. But for collectors now, it's a holy grail.
It is, but authenticity is everything. Because it's based on a regular Regal, it's easy to make a clone. A real documented GNX is an incredibly valuable piece of history.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. 1996, the Chevy LT4. This is the Gen 6 small block.
The LT4 is a really interesting engine. It's kind of the forgotten bridge between the old world and the new world.
The final chapter for that original small block Chevy architecture that started way back in 1955.
Exactly. This was the last and greatest version of that specific lineage before the LS engine came and changed everything forever.
Let's see the specs. 350 cubic inches, 5.7 liters, and 330 horsepower.
Which was a very, very strong number for a naturally aspirated V8 in the mid-90s.
But it had some quirky technology. I'm saying reverse cooling here. What is that?
That was Chevy's clever trick to run high compression on pump gas. In a normal engine, coolant flows into the hot engine block first, and then up to the cylinder heads. The LT4 did the opposite. It sent cool water to the cylinder heads first.
Why? To cool the hottest part of the engine directly.
That's it. The combustion chambers in the head, that's where the fire is. By cooling the heads directly, they could prevent detonation or knock, which allowed them to run a high 10.8-to-1 compression ratio. It was brilliant.
But it had a fatal flaw. A name that strikes fear into the hearts of mechanics.
The OptiSpark.
Oh, the OptiSpark.
Yes.
I sent some painful memories there.
It was the distributor, the part that sends the spark to each cylinder. And because of the reverse flow water pump design, they had to mount the distributor on the front of the engine, directly underneath the water pump sweep hole.
So, if the water pump started to leak, which they all do eventually,
it leaked coolant directly into the high-voltage electronics of the distributor. And as we know, water and electronics are not friends. It was an infamous failure point.
So it was a powerful, advanced engine with a single, glaring Achilles heel.
That's the perfect way to describe it. But it proved that the classic pushrod V8 could still be competitive, and it really set the stage for the revolution that was coming next.
Which brings us to segment 4, the 2000s and 2010s, and what you're calling the supercharger revolution.
This is the point where the automakers stop being subtle and just decide to embrace pure, unapologetic excess again.
It kicks off in 2004 with the Ford 4.6 modular supercharged engine, better known as the Terminator.
What a perfect name, right? The Terminator Cobra. It really did terminate the competition.
This was a huge culture shift. Before this, if you wanted a supercharger, it was an aftermarket part you installed in your garage, and you crossed your fingers it wouldn't blow up.
Right. It was tumor stuff, often unreliable. With the Terminator, Ford's SVT division said, no, here you go. Here is a factory-engineered, factory-installed Eaton supercharger with a full warranty. Go have fun.
The specs. It was a double overhead cam, 32-valve V8, making 390 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque.
And surprise, surprise, those numbers were very conservative. Most of them made well over 400 horsepower right out of the box.
But the real story that the builders talk about is the engine block itself. It was made of cast iron.
In an era where aluminum blocks were becoming the norm to save weight, Ford went backwards. They chose a heavy iron block for this one engine.
Why would they do that?
One word, strength. Iron is incredibly rigid. When you're forcing 8 or 10 pounds of boost into an engine, the cylinder walls are under immense stress. An aluminum block can flex, an iron block does not. This engine was massively over-engineered. The bottom end was practically bulletproof.
Which meant it became an instant legend in the tuning community.
It changed everything. It made the term pulley swap mainstream. You could buy a smaller pulley for the supercharger, which makes it spin faster and create more boost, upload a new software tune, and you could be making 500 or 600 horsepower on the stock engine internals.
It was the gateway drug for a new generation of enthusiasts into forced induction.
It completely democratized high horsepower. You didn't have to be a master engine builder anymore.
And then Dodge, who had been relatively quiet, looked at what Ford was doing and said, hold my drink.
That is exactly what happened. The Hellcat.
2014, the Dodge 6.2 Hellcat.
This is the moment the horsepower war went from a skirmish to a full-blown nuclear exchange.
The number was 707 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque.
I vividly remember the day that was announced. Everyone in the industry thought it was a typo. 700 horsepower was. That was hypercar territory. That was for dedicated race cars.
Yeah.
It was not for a Challenger you could walk into a dealership and finance.
How do they even make that possible from a reliability standpoint?
Well, it's a 6.2-liter Hemi, but on top of it sits a 2.4-liter IHI twin-sprue supercharger. The supercharger itself is bigger than the entire engine in a small economy car.
But the real insight from the builder notes isn't just the raw power. It's this concept of manufacturing confidence.
That's the key. Any decent race shop can build a 700 horsepower engine that will last for a few drag strip passes. Dodge had to engineer one that would survive a 1,200,000-mile warranty, start in a Minnesota winter, and sit in Arizona traffic without overheating.
So what did that involve? The transmission, for example?
They used a German-made ZF 8-speed automatic transmission that was originally designed for like Rolls-Royces and Bentleys. It's incredibly robust, and the cooling system is just immense. It has multiple heat exchangers. And the fuel system.
What about the fuel system?
At wide open throttle, the Hellcat's fuel pumps can drain the entire gas tank in about 13 minutes. It's flowing an incredible amount of fuel.
It completely normalized an absurd number. Now, 700 horsepower almost seems achievable.
It shifted the Overton window of what we considered possible for a street car.
Okay, so that brings us to today. We've gone from brute force iron through the dark ages to a supercharger war. Now we land in segment 5, the modern era, where efficiency finally meets power.
The current state of the art. It's a fascinating place to be.
We start in 2019 with the Chevy LT2, the engine from the C8, mid-engine Corvette.
The revolution. Putting the engine behind the driver changed everything.
How did that affect the engine design itself?
It's all about packaging and center of gravity. But look at the specs. 6.2 liters naturally aspirated, making around 495 horsepower. And the most shocking part, it's still a pushrod V8. I know. Everyone assumed that for the mid-engine car, Chevy would finally have to switch to a more exotic double overhead cam design like Ford or Ferrari, but they stuck with the old-school cam and block layout.
Was that just nostalgia? Or was there a real engineering reason?
A very real reason. Physics. A pushrod engine is incredibly compact. It's short and low. An overhead cam engine is very tall and wide because you have all that valvetrain hardware sitting on top of the cylinder heads. By sticking with pushrods, Chevy could mount the engine incredibly low in the chassis, giving the C8 its amazing low center of gravity.
But it's packed with modern tech. I see dry sump oiling. We talked about Ford's side oiler from '67 trying to solve an oiling problem. This is the modern version.
This is the ultimate solution to that same problem.
So explain a dry sump system to me like I'm 5.
Okay. A normal car has a wet sump. All the engine oil sits in a big, flat pan at the bottom of the engine, like water in a bathtub. The oil pump has a pickup tube that sucks oil from that pan. The problem is, if you take a super sharp corner like the C8 can, all the oil sloshes to one side of the pan,
And the pump sucks air.
which is catastrophic, instant engine failure. A dry sump system has a very shallow pan. Multiple pumps suck all the oil out of the engine the instant it gets there and send it to a tall, separate remote oil tank. The main pressure pump then draws from that tank, which always has a steady supply of oil, no matter what G-forces the car is pulling.
That's pure race car technology, and it's standard on every base model Corvette.
It tells you everything you need to know about the level of performance that is now considered standard.
And on the other side of the modern coin, we have our final engine, the 2023 Ford 5.0 Coyote Gen 4.
The naturally aspirated survivor.
In a world dominated by turbos, Ford has kept the Mustang GT's V8 pure.
And thank heavens for that. There's just nothing that can replicate the instant throttle response and linear power delivery of a great naturally aspirated engine.
The specs are incredible, just 5.0 liters making about 480 horsepower, but the number that jumps out at me is the compression ratio, 12-1.
12 to 1 on regular pump gas. Just think about that. Back in 1971, the Pontiac engineers had to drop their compression to 8 to 1 just to survive on unleaded gas. Now we're running 50% higher.
How is that even possible without the engine just blowing itself to pieces?
Two main things: incredibly smart computer controls and direct injection.
Explain how direct injection helps with that.
In a traditional engine, fuel is sprayed into the intake port, where it mixes with air before going into the cylinder. With direct injection, the injector sprays a fine mist of high-pressure liquid fuel directly into the already hot combustion chamber. As that liquid fuel instantly vaporizes, it causes a cooling effect.
So the fuel itself acts as a localized air conditioner inside the cylinder.
That's a perfect way to put it. It pulls heat out of the chamber right before combustion, which staves off detonation and allows for that super high compression.
And this engine makes its power with RPM. It loves to rev.
Oh yeah. The Coyote is a screamer. Redline is over 7,000 RPM. It's got 4 camshafts, 32 valves. It's all about breathing efficiently at high engine speeds.
So if the 1960s was all about winning with cubes, just raw displacement, the modern Coyote is about how smart you can be with just 5.0 liters.
It's making almost 100 horsepower per liter naturally aspirated. That's a number that was reserved for exotic Ferraris just a decade or so ago.
It's truly amazing to trace that entire arc.
It's a heck of a journey.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We've looked at 12 engines spanning nearly 60 years.
We started with the sheer brute force of the 396 and the 427, just big iron, big carburetors, and a prayer that it wouldn't overheat.
Then we saw the peak with the LS6, immediately followed by the emissions crash with the 455 HO and the Cleveland just trying to hang on for dear life.
Then the total surprise of the turbo V6. The GNX came out of nowhere and showed everybody what computers and boost could do.
That led to the supercharged resurgence. The Terminator and the Hellcat just threw subtlety out the window and went for broke.
And that all brings us to today. With the modern, efficient V8s like the LT2 and the Coyote, using incredibly sophisticated science and code to make reliable, daily drivable power we could have only dreamed of back then.
You know, the big trade-off is simplicity. We lost something there. You can't tune a 2023 Coyote with a screwdriver and a timing light in your driveway.
That's true. We lost that tactile connection. But think about what we gained. We gained incredible reliability, unbelievable efficiency for the power they make. You can start a 707 horsepower Hellcat on a 10-degree morning and it will just work. Try that with a race-tuned 427 Hemi. It would just flood out and foul its plugs.
So that brings us to the big so what? The real takeaway from this entire deep dive.
The history of the American V8 isn't a straight upward line. It's not a simple story of it just got better every year. It's a series of reactions.
Reactions to what?
Reactions to the rules of NASCAR and Le Mans. Reactions to the Clean Air Act. Reactions to oil embargoes and gas prices. Reactions to new technology. The automotive engineer never gets to work in a perfect world. They are always solving the problem that society has just thrown at them.
So it's more like an organism that has to adapt to a changing environment.
That's exactly. It adapts to survive. And sometimes those adaptations lead to incredible leaps forward.
So I want to leave everyone listening with a final thought, a provocative question to chew on.
What's that?
Right now, today, we can walk into a showroom and buy a 480 horsepower naturally aspirated V8 that gets decent gas mileage, or a 700-plus horsepower supercharged monster that starts every single time and has cooled seats and a warranty. By any objective measure, we are living in the absolute golden age of performance.
I sense a but coming.
But are we? Is this the real golden age? Or does the soul and the character of that 1960s iron still hold the crown? The smell of unburnt fuel from the rich carburetor, the lumpy idle that shakes the whole car at a stoplight, the constant threat that it might just decide not to cooperate. Do those imperfections, does that struggle actually make for a better, more rewarding experience?
That is the great debate, isn't it? Is perfection actually a little bit boring? Does the fact that you have to work for it, that you have to understand the machine, make the reward that much sweeter when it all comes together?
Something to think about on your next drive. And while you do,
This information is presented by Bluewater Auto Restoration.
please don't forget to visit BlueWaterAutoRestoration.com. If you love the history and the soul of these machines we've been talking about, you will absolutely love what they're doing over there.
And remember, our podcasts are available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud.
Thanks for coming on this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.